Welcome to the New Hampshire Veteran Friendly Business Lunch and Learn session. We are excited to have Dr. Gary Schaub with us. He's the Senior Advisor for Professional Military Education in the Office of the Secretary of Defense, Undersecretary for Personnel and Readiness. He's also the Executive Lead for the DOD SkillBridge Program. He has a lot of information to share. SkillBridge is a great opportunity for a lot of people. And so with that, Dr. Schaub.
Jim said, I'm Dr. Gary Schaub. I work for the Secretary of Defense, down a few layers from his position though. And I'm in charge of the DOD SkillBridge Program, although I have a program manager and then some staff below her that handles all the nitty gritty of it. And I thought I would start off a little bit by telling you that it's a fantastic program. It is almost as close as you can get to a direct pipeline for hiring transitioning service members as we have available. There are also federal labor exchanges that the Department of Labor runs that are a good pipeline for posting jobs. Something I'll get into a little bit here is that despite what I just said as a pipeline, it's not necessarily a jobs board or an employment service. And that's an important distinction here that I'll go into for its purposes and why we established this program and what we hope to get out of it for ourselves as the Department of Defense, for the service member, for external organizations, and for the nation writ large. And with that, I'm going to start sharing my screen to see whether or not I can run a little PowerPoint presentation here for you, because it's the Department of Defense and we speak in PowerPoint. So let's get this up here. Window. Fantastic. All right. Well, as I said, this is the I'm the executive level lead for the Department of Defense SkillBridge Program, and it is the Department of Defense SkillBridge Program. There are SkillBridge programs, and I can't see myself anymore. I'm going to put air quotes around it, that other people, other organizations, whether they're federal agencies such as the Department of Labor or companies or state level agencies as well, they are SkillBridge partners and they call their programs SkillBridge programs, but they are only such because they are associated with our DOD SkillBridge program and have a memorandum of understanding with us to facilitate the relationship. I'm saying that in part because the messaging around the program itself has been iffy, and one of the reasons why we're engaging with you, for example, is to ensure that
we be able to run it concurrently.
Well, I mean, you would actually, I suppose, but not with the name itself. And anyway, that's something we can get into a little bit in the discussion. But I was wanting to lead with that because one of the things that has been missing from the discussion is that preface of Department of Defense, and it has caused some little issues for us. So my agenda for this morning is to essentially talk about SkillBridge as it is. So describe the program, its purposes, its origins, how it has evolved over the past decade, and then take it up to SkillBridge 2.0, which is where we're going with the program as we reform it, and then finally a little how-to on how to become a DOD SkillBridge partner. That way, we can close the loop on that because, the bottom line is service members don't serve until they die unless bad things happen out in the field. But they do eventually leave employment in the Department of Defense. They do leave the uniformed service, and they do join the civilian labor market. And we work very hard to facilitate that transition so that they have they're not unemployed or homeless or have other difficulties that are second or third order effects that come from, big life changes, such as changing your primary employer, particularly given the model of personnel development that we have in the military, which is you get people either out of high school or out of college when they're young, and their first and only employment experience perhaps is with the Department of Defense, and it is a very all-encompassing type of employment, 24/7, as opposed to working, at the local company where they might have had a summer job when they were in high school or what have you. So the program here, and I want to emphasize one other thing too, is the name itself, not just the Department of Defense preface, but also SkillBridge. The purpose of the program is to help service members take the knowledge, skills, abilities, attitudes, attributes that they've developed in the military and bridge whatever gaps remain so that they are ready to be employed in the civilian labor market. And so part of what I'll discuss here is how a SkillBridge partner helps gap that skill gap for them by providing training. So let me go through SkillBridge 101. So the point I was just making, and I guess I'm getting it slightly ahead of myself, is that this DOD SkillBridge program is designed in order to gap those skills so that they can gain easy civilian employment. The second big point of this is that it's a program for service members. So people serving in uniform within a window of the final 6 months of their term of service. It's not a program for veterans, and it's not a program for spouses. It's a program for veterans to be. And this is where some of that confusion has come into play that I mentioned before. Yeah, it's not a program for the spouses in particular, although SkillBridge partners can set up sort of parallel programs, as was mentioned a little bit ago, where spouses could be targeted for providing training or for other ways of facilitating their employment, but it would not be part of ours, because the key thing here is that they remain a member of the U.S. military, and they remain in our employ, and they remain our responsibility. And frankly, they can be called up if the unit requires it. And indeed, this is that last part that's important to understand, because they remain part of their own unit and they are responding to and responsible to their chain of command. Their first field grade commander has to approve their going out and doing this on the side or in lieu of pursuing their current duties. So there had been some, and again, I'm prefacing these bullet points with problems of the past because there had been some anticipation from many partners, particularly as the program has grown, which I'll go into in a minute, where they thought that once they had a handshake deal with a service member, that it was all said and done. But that's not the case, because again, it's not an employment program for the service member, it's a training program for them. And that last key step here for the partners themselves is that we in the Department of Defense, we vet potential partners. There's an application process, and then we approve them and sign a legal document, a memorandum of understanding with the partner, so that everybody understands their roles and responsibilities and obligations. And that is, had been a somewhat easy, then onerous, and now going back more towards the easy type of process. And in part, that has to do with one of the reasons why we're in the midst of reforming the program to go on to SkillBridge, what we're calling 2.0. Now, we're moving on to SkillBridge 2.0. And I'm going to give you a slight history program of this lesson. And frankly, in giving your own experiences, whether in government or in the private sector or in the public sector, this kind of development for a program, this organic growth I'm about to talk about, might seem familiar to you. So back in the mid to late 2000s, Congress was very concerned that as veterans were, service members were leaving the military during the midst of the Iraq War and the war in Afghanistan, and going into the civilian labor market, that gap in their skills and also some socialization issues were preventing them from being employed. In particular, this geared up right after the financial crisis when veteran unemployment was above that of civilian unemployment. And of course, the Great Recession was a motivator for all sorts of changes in the way in which we as a society and we as a federal government do business. So Congress authorized and actually told the Department of Defense to start a pilot program called JTest AI. And JTest AI stands for job training, employment skills training, apprenticeships, and internships. And during the 2011 to 2014 period, the services, the Army, the Air Force, the Navy, the Marine Corps, and the Coast Guard took to this with different degrees of enthusiasm, I guess is the best word to use. And so it's lingered out there for a little bit at this time. In 2014, the Office of the Secretary of Defense put forth a general policy for the entirety of the department. And for those 5 years, we in the Secretary's office allowed the military departments, the services, to run their own programs. It was decentralized. It was somewhat laissez-faire. There was no vetting process from us, as I mentioned just a minute ago. Instead, there were handshake deals with installation commanders and service members and local employers just outside the installation gate. And that's where these were coming into play, where JTest AI programs were existing. And that was fine for a transition period, but led to additional problems as the program began to grow. In 2019, my former boss, Fred Drummond, who was the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Force Education and Training, he had run this program along with other programs in education and credentialing for the U.S. Navy for a number of years before he came over to the Office of the Secretary of Defense. And he said, look, there is a lot of risk that's involved with this program because we're letting 1,000 flowers bloom. Different agreements are being reached with different conditions for service members and different types of outcomes and different quality of outcomes. So what he wanted to do was to centralize the program, particularly its administration, and allow decentralized execution on the part of the service member. So we established an enterprise-wide MOU for the Army, the Navy, the Marine Corps, the Air Force, and the Coast Guard. We set up a website so that all those partners out there that were offering programs to service members would be listed. And you can do your match.com or your monster.com, whatever your paradigm happens to be for these kinds of, this kind of research into developing a relationship is. So we have a centralized website for the partners and the service members. And that greatly accelerated the growth of the program. Far more than Mr. Drummond had anticipated or hoped for, frankly. He was a huge advocate of the program, and he would try to explain it and describe it and sell it as often as he could. He was a great public face for it, and it grew fantastically. It was like throwing fertilizer out onto those thousands of flowers. And it became very popular with service members. And we went from 150 partners, and that's as I said, that we had a decentralized execution and these decentralized handshake deals. So it might have been a little bit more than that, but we in the center of the Department of Defense and the Pentagon could not actually get a good estimate of how many partnerships there were, which emphasized the need for us to centralize the administration of it. And we've grown it significantly. And actually, that number that I have up there is from August, but we're up over 2,700 now. And it's still growing at a good clip. And because of all of that program growth, we're trying to reform the program and ensure that there is quality control on the part of vetting potential partners, on the type of training programs that are being implemented by those partners, the expectations between the partner and the service member, and also the partner, the service member, and their commander, and then finally a little bit of a back end after action report, because we like doing that in the Department of Defense, to see how well things turned out. And so essentially what we've tried to do here, as I just said, is make the program scalable and, and increase the, increase the institutionalization. I'm sitting out here on the West Coast in a little software company's offices with a friend of mine who I'm visiting, and we're moving from being a little startup called DOD SkillBridge to being the Microsoft or the Amazon of it. It has grown rapidly. We're ensuring that it's deeply institutionalized and run well, because after all, frankly, this ends up being taxpayer dollars to pay the salaries and the benefits of those service members while they're off getting this additional training to help them transition into the civilian labor sector. Now, with all that said, and that's our internal view, because as a good government bureaucrat, you always look at yourself first before you start talking to external partners. I want to talk a little bit about how to become a DOD SkillBridge partner, which is why you all are here. As I said just a minute ago, we do have a website, and that website at the moment, regrettably, is a bit clunky, but there will be a new one up by the end of this coming fiscal year. So by the summer of next year, there's going to be something much better than is there now. But it is a serviceable website, and it'll allow you as a potential partner to create a profile, and then fill out an application, and include in that application what you intend to have that service member spend their time on and the reasons why they would be doing those things. So for example, my friend who's here in this, letting me use their conference room space here, he's making coffee right now. We wouldn't want a separating master sergeant to be an intern who makes coffee and, runs errands. That's not a skill set for them to get, but rather a training program that is designed more towards a model position or a model occupation type. Like, for example, something that this administration has really leaned into is resolving supply chain issues. So we had earlier this year a rather large push to get transitioning service members who drive big vehicles to go out, and if they didn't already have the equivalent of a commercial driver's license, to gap train the additional bits that they would need so that they could leave the service and sit in a big rig truck and help out the general economy by alleviating some of the supply chain issues. And that's the kind of macro effect we're looking for, as I said earlier, for the department and for the nation, as opposed to just the partner and the service member. Clearly we want to help partners get good employees, and we want service members to get good jobs, but understanding what that training plan is and where they would be going and what they would be doing in general is where we're taking this program. What we do during that process is we look at the material, we assess whether or not it meets the criteria that I just discussed, and approval is not guaranteed. As I said, in the past where there were these handshake deals at the installation level, there's an echo of that still remains out in the ether, where everyone thinks that if they shake the hand of the service member, that, or I shouldn't say everyone, but some people have come to us and said, but gosh, the sergeant and I made a deal. Well, that was nice, but not the actual requirement for becoming a partner. Upon approval, again, there'll be a legal document, a memorandum of understanding that will be sent to the partner for signature, and then they'll send it back to us. We'll do a final review, and then the DOD co-signs. And then we each have a framework, again, for roles, responsibilities, and obligations between the department and the partner. And preferably, and this is something that we're moving to, also an agreement between the partner and the service member, just to close that loop off and ensure that we have level set expectations on all sides. But given that former model of the decentralized execution and decentralized administration and the, I guess, vast diversity in the types of training programs and partners that are out there, we have yet to come up with essentially a catalog of model agreements for those between the service member and the partner, and we're working on that. It's actually a fairly heavy lift to make it scalable to the degree of granularity that we would really like to have to ensure that the program is being administered well. And then finally, excuse me for a second, we take that partnership and we post the relevant information to the website so that other partners can see it, so that the service members can see it, and we can do the matchmaking, excuse me, the matchmaking at that level. Because these are the types of questions that we get very regularly from potential partners and even current partners, I wanted to put these in here now. And as I said at the beginning, the name is everything. We're attempting to bridge the skills that these service members have to fill in the gaps between what they can do and what they do know to what they need to know and what they need to be able to do in the civilian labor market. We're going to judge, and we do, although we're coming up with a methodology for making the assessment even better, assess at the end whether or not that training program was worthwhile. And frankly, the primary metric that we want to use is whether or not that service member had a high probability of being employed in the civilian sector when they left. So, did that training actually gap the skills effectively so that they could go out and get a job? Whether that job is with the actual partner itself, because many partners are looking to the SkillBridge program as a scalable, for them, a scalable pipeline of incoming talent. So if it's a very large company, for example, our largest partner is Amazon, and Amazon has a full menu of occupational types that they hire into, and they have separate training programs for each of those, and they have a nice pipeline. Actually, a former retired Marine colonel who was a student of mine back in 2008 is head of Amazon's program in this regard. And they have a very, if you have a large business, they've scaled it rather well. But this also applies to the mom and pop, where they might want to hire just organically and be a one and done partner. So we have a large scale there. And sometimes, and this is a bit of a, I'm sure that you might have encountered this in your own personal life, everybody wants to make a buck. And there have been opportunists who have come along who have seen federal government and service members attempting to obtain training as a potential cash cow and a way to tap into their GI Bill benefits, for example. And so as part of the administrative review process, we want to ensure that the service member is not being charged out of pocket for things, materials or equipment or books. Like, for example, if the trainee is to become an electrician, maybe this company or this partner wants them to buy $5,000 worth of tools, uniforms and other things for them to be effectively trained. And the Department of Defense won't pay for that because those people work for us, and well, frankly, they get their boots and they get their uniforms through an allowance from the Department of Defense. And if they need a gun, we give them a gun. If they need a wrench, we give them a wrench as part of the job. And anyway, so this has come up as a key issue. And then finally, just to emphasize this last bit, they do remain in uniform. They're not an employee. They can't be paid. They can't be given, in-kind compensation. So, for example, in the tool example, that would be like a library book, right? Or if you, I don't know what your education was like when you were young, but I went to a public school, and the school gave us the math book, and then we turned it back in at the end of the year. So something along those lines. There can't be a conflict of interest for the service member. So for example, we did have a potential partner that applied I'm going to put air quotes around this. You might not be able to see me, in the pharmaceutical business, where they were growing a particular plant whose use is becoming more prevalent and legal at the state level, but not at the federal level. And they wanted to train service members to do things in that business. And frankly, that would have been an ethical conflict for the service member and might have gotten them prosecuted under the UCMJ. So we denied their application on that basis. And finally, there's a risk issue here as well. Some training programs like doing electrical work on high voltage systems, for example, would put a service member at risk. And we would like to minimize that because their unit commander is still responsible for them and would have to write the letter to their mother saying, I'm sorry, but your son or daughter has been killed in an accident at ABC Electrical Company while they were still employed by the Department of Defense. And someone might ask the question of what were they doing at ABC Electrical Company and who's responsible for that death? These are thorny issues, frankly, that we are trying to minimize as we go through. And just finally, I want to thank you very much for your interest, for being here at lunch. I know no one's, I'm sure someone's having Subway delivered to you right now so that you can munch a little bit during the Q&A, help you learn at lunch. But besides that, I'd really like to thank you very much for what you have been doing probably and what you may be doing in the future to help our service members transition successfully and to be good civilians just as they were, good servants of our country. And with that, I'll wrap it up and come back to you.
Hey, Gary, I have a couple of questions. One, would you be able to send this slideshow around to everybody?
I can.
Okay, perfect. And my second question is just on the second part with completing the application in regards to the training plan and the model positions. So we have 2 or 3 positions that service members from the Navy work really well for, but we have 100 different positions or more in our company, and I got to imagine a company like Amazon has thousands of positions. Do you need a training plan for each job and a model position for every job we would want to put somebody through potentially for this program, or does our general training program work? And what does a huge company do that might have 1,000 positions?
Yeah, so I want to say at the moment we're straddling between what had been we're still transitioning from that handshake deal where there are potential abuses to where we want to get far more granular to understand where that's at. So the question is a great one. I want to say at the moment, bearing in mind the transition that we're in, a generalized training program that tells us that the service member that is being used effectively, that they're learning something, okay, and that increases their ability to be employed towards something. So for example, if it was, if the program itself said we're going to teach them how to drive a tractor trailer, but the job itself was, to be a plumber or a steam fitter or something, there's an incompatibility there. But if it's, I don't want to degrade this to a certain extent to say, well, if it's simply an orientation program to the company, that might not be enough. Mm-hmm. So somewhere in there where we can actually see what the gap is going, what gap is going to be filled would be good. Like I said, Amazon they already had, that set menu for warehouse worker or a driver or, logistician or gosh, they just do a lot of stuff, right? Amazon Web Services, and they already had their own training programs for employing people off the street, and they just pretty much slotted those in with a little bit of I'll call it advanced credit, depending on the qualities that the service member individually brought to the training program.
Okay. So do you think it would be better just to focus on a few jobs we think that would be beneficial?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, and you know, of course, you know, you can think about this as a process. You know, time never stops, right? We're always in a movie, unless of course the screen freezes. You know, get the partnership going with one. You know, with one program is, you know, of course, scalable, right? And then come back after you see how it works with a second, and then a third, and then a fourth.
Mm-hmm.
That seems to be a workable model.
Okay.
And we're doing that with a lot of trucking companies. Yeah, they don't want to hire just drivers, but you know, mechanics and logisticians and you know, accountants and all these other things that they have to do in order to ensure that they can run their business as well.
All right. Thank you.
Here, I have a question. It's done. Let's say the is Kansas and our opportunities in Alabama. Can they receive per diem to cover travel and housing and meals and accountants with the federal government plan for per diem?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's frankly a problem that we're dealing with, particularly with people who are deployed overseas. You know, when they're outside of the continental U.S., it's difficult for them to engage in the SkillBridge program. And we're working, you know, we in the services are working on solutions that are legal, and which is a key thing here, within the legal constraints, and also within the services individual policies for PCSing, for their separation. You know, there are some slightly different policies for how, you know, terminal leave will be handled and whether or not there's travel that's attached to that. And so, regrettably, at the moment, it's not uniform across the services. And later, you know, an hour or three, I'll be chairing a meeting with all the SkillBridge leads, and this is one of our topics of conversation. But the bottom line is, it's possible to have somebody go from one state to another as part of that move, but there are going to be different types of considerations and complications that might arise.
Thank you. Could you talk a little bit about the difference between the different plans that a participant could be involved in? What I mean is between an internship, an apprenticeship, and I think there are a couple of others. What were the key differences? Because we recognize ourselves that we were balanced between intern and apprentice. Apprenticeship has a much more robust series of requirements.
Yeah.
If you could explain that a little bit.
Yeah, and here's where I wish Melora McVicker, my program manager, was here, because she's the person who's been reviewing these, you know, at a granular level. So she's had a lot of experience drawing those distinctions. With regard to the apprenticeships, we've been working really hand in glove with the Department of Labor and their registered apprenticeship program. And because apprenticeships usually last at least a year and usually are from 2 to 4, depending upon whether they're time-based or competency-based or a hybrid between the two, a SkillBridge a SkillBridge apprenticeship is sort of a pre-apprenticeship that then would, you know, they would transition into being a full-time apprentice after they left the service. And also, if they were doing this kind of job in the service under the United Services Military Apprenticeship Program, you know, we would hope that, you know, I shouldn't say we would hope, we would expect that their time there or their competencies that they developed would count for, you know, the apprenticeship type program on the outside in the civilian world. So we do, as you said, have a good set of robust standards that we're aiming toward incorporating within SkillBridge in that apprenticeship space. The internships are squishy, and we haven't come up with a very good and concise set of criteria beyond asking for that training plan and the types of things that they would be doing as an intern. You know, and I have seen, and we've talked about different levels of formality that are in those plans when it comes to internships. And, you know, ends up being sometimes a judgment call. And mostly what we've been doing in that space is attempting to socialize the potential partner to be more and more explicit. So, you know, we're happy to work with them as we go through so that they can fully develop, if they don't have already, you know, I'll call it a robust internship program.
So would it be feasible then for a company to be accepted as a partner initially as an internship, understanding that we're developing the more formal and robust apprenticeship with the DOL? Would that be a smooth transition between one to the other?
That sounds great. That sounds like an ideal setup there.
Thank you. I do have Andre who wanted to ask a question.
Hey, do you hear me? Sorry about that.
Yeah, Andre, you're good to go. First time caller, long time listener.
Yeah, there you go. Hey, first, I've got a kudo and a question, maybe a gripe. But first of all, thank you so much for this event. I've been a SkillBridge partner both in the civilian sector and here at the state government of New Hampshire for about 5 years now, and I've hired about 100.
Wow,
SkillBridge.
thank you.
Absolutely. Well, by way of background, I'm Colonel USAF retired. When I was a vice wing commander, I got very excited about this program. I think it's wonderful. Having said that, I brought the program to the state of New Hampshire government about a year ago. And we've had great success. We've hired a few, and we continue to program new SkillBridgers. What I've noticed, and here's the gripe part, is that we've been trying, there's several other state agencies. What we did is we did a statewide MOA, MOU, but as we tried to bring other state agencies on, DOT, the Department of Transportation, we're the only agency currently on the list as a partner. We haven't been able to get good responsiveness out of the SkillBridge office. Is that something that's going to change? If so, that's very welcome. And I do have a part two, maybe after. I
want to say yes. I mean, regrettably, as I had to, much of my 2022 was spent dealing with the vast and unanticipated growth in the program. Essentially had been running, our dad's D, who was a fantastic advocate, but he left at the end of the Trump administration, left a young GS-14 in charge, and he quickly became overwhelmed, which then brought me in. We kind of, as new leadership came in, and explained the program to them and the problems and so on and so forth, and eventually to get some dedicated funding. I rewrote the contract with the contractor, and we're in the midst of implementing it now. The new contract kicked in on August 1, so the contractor was able to throw more people at the problem, and and that's helped us get over the deficit. You'll see changes to the website, which will help responsiveness. We'll have some chat bots, for example, to handle the more routine questions in an automatic manner immediately. We also, frankly, just wrote into the program there and into the contract, some performance standards with regard to responsiveness, phone calls 24 hours and whatnot, because, regrettably, sometimes, and for understandable reasons, a partner would get frustrated and then write to Senator Who's-He-What's-Its from their state, and then, the senator staff calls over or sends an RFI, and you got to staff that all the way up to the undersecretary level, and it's a bit of a headache. So I'm trying hard to keep those from coming in.
Well, that's all great news. I guess my concluding comment, I guess, would as being a longtime practitioner, number one, anybody on the call who's not part of this program, it is fantastic. You're going to get the best folks you could ever imagine, and you're going to be really happy that you're a part of it. It's these service members are wonderful, skilled. They come in the door knowing when to show up, where to show up, and with a good attitude. So that's first of all. But second of all, in the transition, and I'm with you on the transition to a more detailed training plan, I guess the only caution that even as a state we would have is if Amazon becomes the template of that, I have concerns that the expectation is just going to be too high for smaller and mid-sized companies to be able to fulfill the administrative workload that's going to take to do detailed training plans for all these folks. I guess an appeal to some middle ground would be my concluding comment on that.
Yeah, thank you. That's reasonable. One of the things that we did do when we started emphasizing the training plans more, the website had previously had a model, I think actually 2 model training plans there as examples, and they were from Microsoft, and they were dealing with cyber training, and those are very detailed, frankly, and did scare off a lot of potential partners, or at least I think it concerned them, and so they contacted us. So we've now put a few different examples up there. And we're still feeling our way through exactly what the correct level of granularity is going to be, but I think that we're squaring the circle, moderately well thus far, and my real aim here is to have it pretty much up and most of SkillBridge, what we're calling SkillBridge 2.0, up and running successfully. All these reforms implemented by next summer. I gave the contractors a fiscal year to get it right. So hopefully they will come through.
Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Schaub, I have a couple questions.
Okay, Jim, go for it.
All right. So I'm just curious, and I may have missed it trying to track the chat and whatnot. SkillBridge is still between 90 and 180 days before ETS or retirement, correct?
Well, it's up. I mean, the window itself is those 180 days. It's going to be somewhere in there. Now, the services do have different, harmonizing between the services is hard. They do have slightly different requirements on timelines for terminal leave, house hunting, and things like that that chop into those 180 days.
Right.
So when I give you really, spitball advice on length, yes, between 60 and 120 is probably, in that dead center space. NASA wanted to kick it. I mean, NASA sent us a plan. They wanted every single of those 180 days, and we're like, no, we can't do that for you. Sorry.
Right.
But you can train them more after you hire them.
Excellent. Okay. And then what are you using to track expectations from employers? And I asked this because recently we tried to join a pilot program through DOL, and there's a lot to it as far as the tracking goes. So I don't know. I'd like to know what you're using for that.
Yeah, it's again, Melora would be great to have here to help answer that question. So she's we got the contractors are handling the frontline contacts, then things that are problematic bubble up to her, and then things that are really problematic bubble up to me. Although frankly, those are mostly things that come over from Congress or down from the undersecretary's level that I deal with.
Right.
I mean, we've been trying. I want to say that the amount of I'll put it in a positive and negative way. The number of complaints that we've got about lack of responsiveness and the number of personal emails I've had to author to potential partners over the past 6 months has declined markedly. I was doing 2 or 3 of those a day. which wasn't exactly the best use of my time. But it's like, hey, we have a website. Here's the URL. Oh, by the way, something I didn't note before is that as part of the explanatory process, we have a bi-weekly webinar that the contractor is doing for us, and there's also a recording of it, much like we're recording this.
Yeah.
Those are available on the website 24/7. You can sign up. We've been doing those webinars. We got, I think, 5 so far, and a max of 150 participants, and it's maxed out every time. So it's at least 750 people, more have gotten a very comprehensive view of the program, something along these lines, but, with the contractor doing it in, their blue shirt as opposed to mine.
Okay. And then, so I shared with you my previous headaches with trying to get in contact with somebody, and we've heard some other things. So, and thank you for revamping this program. I would ask, what do you guys generally see for a length of time between application to notification of decision?
Yeah. I'll preface this by saying, or qualify it by saying, that it depends on the completeness of the application to begin with.
Right.
There was, and this was part of a messaging problem given the decentralized nature of the program before, where someone would talk to a service member or email a service member or email the former program manager and, think that they were done. And that, just, or even just like asked a question on the website, and it's like, so we had different starting points, which didn't, we couldn't quite level set expectations across that entire population. But we're trying to do that now. Essentially, if everything's complete, it should be within 30. I'll be graceful, between 30 and 60 days as a maximum. But if everything's in place, we've kind of chopped down the volume. And just as a side note, once the contractors were able to throw people at this problem because we were paying them a lot more, manpower is a wonderful thing, I have to say. I asked them to bin different levels of interest expressed by potential partners, and because it seemed like every week that the number went up. When I first took over and looked into this program, and was doing sort of a, not quite an autopsy, but a diagnostic of where all the pain points were. There was about 350, a backlog of about 350 applicants. But that grew to 1,900 as I asked them to start categorizing out, and that was without the incoming on top. So, we've been clearing through those 1,900. We put in a, I want to change this a little bit because I don't think it's entirely nice, but if we haven't heard, if we've contacted you and you haven't responded within 30 days, start over again with a new ticket number. Getting into the ticketing system, this is from a mechanical administrative standpoint, has been maybe the key thing for us. And if they get a ticket, and we can work that and the application is complete, 30 to 60 days ought to be, from application to MOU ought to be good. So
What's your
assessment. It seems like we're going there pretty well.
Yeah, and Miss McVickers has really been wonderful. What's your backlog right now?
She would answer that question, not me.
Yeah, no worries. Just curious.
But I will get an update during the working group in a couple hours, I'm sure.
Okay. All right. And are there any other questions for Dr. Schaub?
I see something in the chat. Yeah, that's the retired colonel.
Yep, I am working on getting that information right now.
Cool. And Jim, what I'll do is I can actually, I don't know, can we drop stuff into the chat?
Yeah, absolutely.
If I drop that PowerPoint presentation into the chat, let me see what I can do here.
And there is a question, how can someone see if they are currently a partner with SkillBridge?
Website, go to the website.
Okay.
That's excuse me. That's the official list. And you know, the lack of a you know, the lack of being listed is important, because there are regrettably, and you know, regrettably, there are still some cats and dogs out there who are living off of, you know, have been grandfathered in from the previous decentralized administration system.
Right.
And, you know, I have encountered more of them than I would care to admit. And, you know, rolling them over into our system means contacting them, ensuring that they're still doing things, ensuring that, you know, they haven't abused a service member, frankly, and then having them, I'll say, supplement their current information with additional information so that we can put them into the system as an equal partner. We're actually looking forward to, I'm establishing a renewal process. Most of the enterprise MOUs started in 2019 and ran for 3 years.
Okay.
So I've already kicked essentially 6 months of a period of time of automatic renewals for a year to give us until the last quarter of next fiscal year. So beginning in April, anyone's MOU expires prior to April 1st, they're getting an additional year, provided we haven't heard that, you know, the CEO has been, you know, frog marched out into the back of a deputy's car or something. Yeah, and hopefully by then we'll have a good renewal process in place, and we can take those grandfathered partners and bring them all up to speed in a systematic way.
Oh yeah. So that brings an interesting question that I have also. How often would they have to renew?
And I hope this went into the chat, but I just there. I'm not sure. I tried to dump a file. How often would they renew? Do you want to try to keep this at a 3 to 5 year period of time?
Okay.
I'm looking forward to expanding that out, frankly, as we get more comprehensive and routine. You know, once we routinize the after action reporting on the back end, and then for everyone on the call, that'll be 3 different things. The first is a service member telling, you know, their commander or their unit what happened to them as they separate. So sort of an an exit interview for the service member. Secondly, an after action report from the partner. For example, we just had a Marine that got booted by their SkillBridge partner because he had a hold my beer moment. So we want an after action report from the partner as well on, hey, are you getting the right people? And if not, then maybe there's something we can do to facilitate that. And then finally, of course, the services have to report back to OSD at a macro level for the program itself. So once I get that triangulation and can see, frankly, on a nice dashboard, as we're really trying to move to with everything in DoD, once I have a dashboard up and I can easily identify what's red, yellow, and green, then it might even just be an automatic renewal going forward rather than a manual process of pulling information from the partner. That would be my ideal.
Okay. Excellent. Does anybody else have any questions? All right, that looks to be a no.
All right, and let me see if I can dump this into the chat again. I don't know if it made it or not.
Yeah, and if you could share any contact information for the program, that would be wonderful. Also, I don't know if you have that readily available to you.
Not, I want to say everything. There was the contact us portion of the DoD website.
Yeah.
We'll get you into the DoD SkillBridge Assistance Center. I think the email address is DoD SkillBridge Assistance Center at livehelpnow.com.
Okay.
I think that's what that is. And that gets you right to the contractors who are handling the front line of stuff.
Excellent.
Yeah. If then there's also an OSD SkillBridge email address, but although I set that up originally as an organizational mailbox because we had the problem of the previous program manager running everything out of his own personal, government account, which meant that if he was on leave or sick or whatever, or just didn't get to it, it would sit in his box and nobody would know. So we fixed that with an organization account. But after we got the contract up and running, we're trying to punt all that over to the contractors for that initial take.
Okay. Well, Dr. Schaub, I really appreciate you joining us. Thank you so much for doing this for us. I would like to just take a moment and stop the recording.